Okay, welcome back to this is, I think, our Passing on Passmore, probably part 2 podcast. And I'm really excited because basically I just get to talk to some of my favorite people with interesting ideas. So the first one was my brother, and the second one is a friend, Jamie Moran. We're going to try and do an audio description. Forgive me that I haven't done it on our other podcasts. So I am a sort of getting to the end of middle-aged woman with grey silver hair, bluey purple glasses, a pink scarf, a maroon top, and I'm in front of a sort of off-white and wood struts panels. Jamie asked me to introduce him, so he says he's sort of half man, half bear. He's sitting in a sort of wolf, not bear. That's terrible, isn't it? Yeah. Take that one out.
That's you.
That's me. Okay, half man, half wolf in his lair, which is his study in London, and he has a grey beard and curly hair and glasses. And like me, he's slightly past middle age, really.
77.
77. Welcome, Jamie.
I'm well past middle age into the age of being crooked.
Being crooked. So he's crooked, but he's still there.
I'm still here, Your Honor.
Very grateful to have you with us.
Okay.
So just to I tried to situate people a bit. And one of the things, apart from having met you and got very excited about your novels, your trilogy of novels, when you were talking to me, is you often send out emails with lots of information and different ideas. And the one that I hope will come to a little way in is this idea of communalism. And that's the idea that I really wanted to explore with you today.
Okay.
But before we go into that, do you want to just say a little bit about yourself or what you've done in the past, just so people know your history? I mean, you lectured at Roehampton.
Yes, that's right. I lectured at Roehampton University for a number of years in psychology and psychotherapy. And I've always been a writer, so I've always been writing. And one project that I have finished is 2 books on passion. And so there's a website where they can go. And this is a different take on passion from the usual. And that's called www.passionofheart.co.uk. And there's I just wanted to put that on the web anonymously in a way, but my web builder wouldn't hear of it. So I had to do something called About. So if anyone goes on About, they can see some more of my history. I've spent a lot of my life my adult life with Sioux Indians. And so that's a big part of it. And that's where I first got the idea of a third way, because they're the source for it. Although obviously it has to be adapted to modern conditions. You cannot just imitate what they did. You can use the spirit of what they did, but you have to find a new form for that spirit. I don't like recounting things about myself, so
no, that's fine. I think that's good enough. Thank you. It's just a sort of place what experience people are talking from, and I think look, that's enough, isn't it? Because what we're trying to do with this is go forwards with the ideas that my initial idea was what would Passmore Edwards sort of do now, passing on that sort of time. But I think listening to your ideas about communalism really excited me, because I keep using the word excited in all these podcasts. It's ridiculous.
That's all right.
I've got to find another word.
You're an excitable lady.
I'm an overexcitable person, and I've had coffee this morning.
That's good. Nothing to be ashamed of.
So let's go into enthusiasm. I feel that we so need to have in our sort of basket of possibilities for the world good ways forwards, and that we need to talk about these good ways forwards and promote them, and not just go into critique, because critique is easy. It's like, how do we go forwards? And so you had a very interesting critique which comes out with this third way of communalism. So could you just give us a little introduction Jamie to that, do you think?
All right. Well, I think for me in my life, there are two sources for this. One is Red Indian way of living, Red Indian way of organizing society. And the other one was pointed out to me by a fabulous old Victorian gentleman called Basil Rugg, who very interesting man. And he used to speak about a Scottish visionary dating from very early in the 1900s called Patrick Geddes. And I think the very phrase, the third way, comes from Geddes. Obviously, the Red Indians don't use that kind of language, but different words can be talking about the same thing. Yes. So those are the two sources. Would you like me to talk a little on those two?
Yes, I think there's, because Patrick Geddes is fantastic, isn't he? And I've looked him up because I've seen you refer to him, and yeah. It just, you know, I'd need to spend a lot more time, but he's a bit
forgotten by many people, but he was a very important figure. Yeah. Tony Blair ruined the phrase the third way, and of course Tony Blair is a great liar and a superficial man, so he thought he could practice it when he got into office, but he was very quickly disabused of that idea. So the third way was something Patrick Geddes came up with specifically as a third way beyond capitalism and communism. He could see that neither of them were working and neither of them were doing any good to the world, but a lot of harm. So this third way beyond those two positions.
And when we were talking the other day, you know, it's saying that sort of thing of capitalism is it's too much on the individual. So the individual has too much sort of stress. And in a way, communism society has too much stress. And either of those can go out of balance. But communalism.
Yeah, let me be a bit Red Indian about this then. And I think what the third way has to do is to not fall into the duality of favoring the freedom of the individual against the solidarity of the community, and vice versa, not favoring the solidarity of the community against the freedom of the individual, or really we should say the freedom of the person. And Geddes and the people who followed him said this, and the Red Indians practiced this. It's implicit. A lot of things with them is implicit. It's in how they live. They don't go in for a lot of abstract thought, but it's all in what they do, which is in some ways is better. But you have to realize that the person is an absolute, and you have to realize that at the same time, the community is an absolute. And these two things are not derived from each other. A community is not a collection of individuals. And the other way around, what would the opposite of that be? An individual is not just a unit on their own, which will never be in relation. These are two paradoxes, a single paradox about our life. These two things make. We have a personhood, and yet there's another personhood. And not only that, not only is there an other, there is some sense in which we are a we. Yes. And we have to accommodate to that.
Yes. Yeah.
And the sin of the right, if you want to put it that way, is to give the wrong kind of freedom to the person, and so the person really disappears. We need to distinguish between the person and the individual. And so you get the freedom of the individual becomes license to be selfish. Yes. I think that's the great core problem on the right. There's a lot more that comes off the back of that, but I just want to deal in basics for a moment. Yes. And of course, the great problem on the left is the potential for the collective. Again, we need two words. We need community as the true version and something like the collective as the false version. is the possibility of the collective bullying the individual and
yes, controlling,
wiping them out, really controlling them either by social means or the ultimate sanction of killing them.
Mm.
So yeah,
I think that's a good one, because it's just that it's trying to keep it fairly simple, isn't it? And it's not about individualism. It's not about collectivism. It is about
correct.
person.
It's about something
It's about person.
beyond
It's about
those two,
community.
which
Yes.
incorporates the best of each
Yes.
of those in a kind of yin yang synthesis. That's very important.
Yes.
There's
And
something else I want to say about the problem of the left, if you're right. It's the fact that this bullying comes through moral idealism. Morality is used as a kind of enforced tyranny over people. And the idea of who is moral and the idea of who is not creates a kind of who's in and who's out. And this moral ideal is more important than living, breathing human beings. And
I
so
was very scared about
you can sacrifice real flesh and blood human beings to this ideal. So the people who don't meet the ideal, well, you can kill them, you can send them to Siberia, you can dismiss them. They're not worthy humans. So there's a kind of moral tyranny on the left, as there is a kind of license to be selfish for the individual on the right.
And they both contend into totalitarianism, can't they? Which
Yes.
I heard a wonderful program about a woman philosopher some years ago, but I can't pretend to really do any justice to it. But she was talking about how these different ways of forms, when they go to extreme, both lead to totalitarianism.
Definitely.
And that is so repressive.
Definitely. Authoritarianism of the right, authoritarianism. They take different forms, however. You can see in our modern world that the authoritarianism of the right, you can see it with Hitler, you can see it with Trump, you can see it with Putin, who is in his funny way simply repeating Hitler. I mean, he's a fascist. He's everything he's doing is, in an odd way, just a repeat of what he claims to be fighting. But the right kind of, the totalitarianism of the left is always buttressed by moral ideals. Yes. And the idea of what's right for the group and what's wrong. And the individual is seen as a disruptor of that ideal. And therefore the ideal is used as a tyranny on people, and people are not accepted, not just as persons, but they're not accepted as human. In other words, there's no compassion for the living, breathing flesh that is thrown into circumstances that it doesn't choose very often. You know what I'm trying to say. Yes. So this idealism becomes a murderous weapon. But on the right, totalitarianism is, I think, more associated with the myth of the superior man or the superior group of men. And that leads it to taking the form of fascism, really. What you see in fascism is that there is the feeling that the mass of humans are mediocre, and only select individuals or a select group of individuals, as in fascism, because fascism was originally the symbol of a group of sticks. So in actual fact, on the right, you can also lose on the right any kind of genuine freedom of the person. And what you get is the few, the enlightened few, the talented few, the intelligent few versus the mediocre many. And this few should be the rulers. And they should, if they have to trick the many, if they have to manipulate, doesn't matter. It's all for their good. The many are not worthy of democracy because the many are mediocre. They're inferior, all of them. And so the only hope for mankind are these few geniuses, these few great men, Putin is one of these great men. Hitler is one of these great men. Do you see what I mean? And then they have around them a group. And sometimes such groups are, without wanting to sound like a conspiracy theorist, nevertheless, sometimes these groups form cabals in secret. There's definite evidence of that in American history. And in a way, the single leader is just a figurehead for that group. And so they're all a little bit equal. So that can take different forms. I think now in Russia, Putin just has a group of yay-sayers around him. But what I'm trying to get across is that it isn't really on the right always the individual versus the many. Sometimes it's the elite group.
Yes.
Now, this elite group should have all the power, and therefore they should have all the money. And this is where capitalism, I think, tends towards the right. And the people who go in for liberal reform of capitalism are actually saving it. It's really a bizarre paradox. They're making it a little more palatable.
Yeah.
But if the extreme right runs capitalism, then of course they and their cronies deserve the money as well as the power. This goes directly against Aristotle, who said that power and money have to be separated in leadership for democracy to exist. And he used the word oligarchy as the opposite of democracy. And I have said in talking about Patrick Geddes that what we have now in the West may not be the right-wing dictatorship exactly, but we do have oligarchy of business. We have business fascism. It's a different kind of fascism, but it's just a vicissitude, because in our sense, the gap between rich and poor gets bigger all the time. It's vast, and de facto, those with money run the show. And so, yeah. Is that clear enough?
Yeah, I think so. We'll ask the people who are listening when they get to listen to it.
Yeah, okay.
So when you were talking at the beginning, I was thinking like it's.
I've got two phrases for you. Sorry.
Oh, yes, please.
I do have some notes here that I like to look at occasionally.
Cool.
So under left, I've said revenge of the many on the few. And under right, I've said contempt of the few on the many.
That's a very good analysis. Yes, I think so. And it just helps hold it, doesn't it? And I was thinking also that whole thing back on the morality, because I always get, I have a faith system, but I get very worried when people talk about morality, because it's like morality without heart.
Yes.
And when my old teacher was talking on, we did a slightly different podcast, but he was talking about not just education, but education of the heart. And
that's very difficult.
Yeah, I know. We can aim high, but it's that thing, isn't it? A person that you have to love the person, but the person also has to love the community, and the community has to love the person. There has to be that sort of acceptance. That's
part of keeping these two opposites together in a kind of tension. They're married, but as in all good marriages, there's tension and fights.
And they're constantly discussing it, isn't it? What's my right?
They're going a little more this way, they're going a little more that way. It depends.
And how do we hold it? So when that dialogue happens, when that good sort of positive tension and dynamic is going on, how do you see that expressed? How do you, so when you've watched the Lakota Sioux and the people that you know well, and you say they more live it than talk about it. I mean, in a way, I'm only having these podcasts because I feel that sometimes we are a bit of an ideas-based culture sometimes, and those ideas.
Definitely, we're much too much in the head.
Too much.
We're not in the heart, and we're not in the soul.
Yeah.
And therefore, we're not in the spirit.
That's enough. I know. Now you've got me on my one where I need to interview you again about quality of soul, because that's another thing I want to talk about. But so how do you feel that communalism, how did Geddes see it?
I agree with you that it's based on love.
Yes.
But there are different degrees and kinds of love. And I think you can set up a society where people enjoy each other, care about each other, interact with each other through respect.
Yes.
It's a lot of things of that nature. And I guess education, it starts with kids.
Mm.
You can't wait until people are adult. Well, you have to in our society because none of us have had that kind of upbringing.
Mm.
But let me just give you one or two examples, if I can think of them, from Red Indian situation. The Red Indian situation is strange strange to the Western experience, because on the one hand, they have very pronounced solidarity of the community, so much so that it affects even how the society is structured. As a Red Indian, you have 90 immediate relations.
Mm.
That's your extended family, 90.
Mm.
And you can go to any of those if you're down on your luck and get a meal and get a roof over your head and all this sort of thing. But in actual fact, that's called the Tioshpe, which is the extended family. But the entire tribe is kin. They're all related to each other in a way. And I've written quite a lot about shamanism and the difference between shamanism and paganism, and the fact that shamanism is nothing like what Western people call paganism. But even that word shamanism, which I like to use, is not quite adequate, because these First Nations are kinship systems. Your first duty as a Red Indian is to be a good kin. Yes. It really starts with that. It doesn't start with shamanic rituals or shamanic trances or anything like that. And you learn things like love, but respect. There's no love without respect. Respect is very important. We're in a period of time now when nobody respects anybody. I mean, some of that is well deserved, but it's ultimately very destructive. So you have to be a good kin. And this means respecting people, but also leaving them free. And this is where the paradox comes in, that these people are incredibly tightly together. The solidarity of the community is a reality for them. It's life and death. They have to pull together, particularly the nomadic ones, because everyone has a different role in that life. The hunting, the warriors, the women who are doing all kinds of jobs. But the point is, you can't afford to fall out with people. Crazy Horse, the great Oglala Sioux war leader, had a very challenging episode in his life where he had to make a great sacrifice. He was in love with a woman. She really was the love of his life. He went away, probably in war or maybe hunting, and I cannot remember the details, but this woman who loved him got married to someone else. Her family forced it on her. And when Crazy Horse came back, of course, he was distraught. And he and the woman ran away for a period of time. And someone came to him. Maybe it was a shaman, or maybe it was his father who was a shaman. I don't know who came to him, but someone came to him and said, look, I understand that for your personal fulfillment, this woman means so much to you. But even though it was an accident, even though it may have happened wrongly and unjustly, if you take this woman away from that family, you're going to split our tribe at a time when we need absolute solidarity to fight the whites. And so, quite consciously, Crazy Horse made the decision to give up this. He had to make reparation to the man as well, but he gave her up and lost the love of his life. Later, he had a very nice marriage, actually, to someone he respected, but didn't love in that way. So that's an example of freedom serving the community, but not being bullied by the community, because he could have said, no, I'm walking away. I'm going to do this. And this is the other, this is a reality in Red Indian society as it was back then, People get together in very large meetings and communally decide courses of action. But any individual, any person can get up and say, I do not agree with this and I'm not going along with it. Even war, you know, the community could decide that they are genuinely menaced by some aggressor and they need to stand up to that. And yet a given warrior could say, no, I don't agree with you and I'm not going to do it. And in that same way, people dethrone chiefs. A chief has no job for life. The way a chief was dethroned was not by killing him or voting him out. The teepees that were camped around his teepee just left early in the morning. And when he woke up and went out of his teepee, he was alone. And he knew that meant he was through. So there is a genuine, another example of this is in Sioux society, you never say thank you when someone gives you a gift. Why? Because that sort of implies an obligation. So if you give a Sioux Indian a gift and you're expecting a lot of strokes for having done so, you're going to be disappointed. They just acknowledge it and that's it, but they don't say thank you. So it is possible, I think, to hold in dynamic creative tension the genuine freedom of the person, let's call it. And I think the key thing is that you must not allow freedom to become license. I can do anything I want to do just because I want to do it. That's license. That's not freedom. And the key thing which undergirds the freedom and the creativity and all these other expressions of personal being is that the person serves the community. And as you said a moment ago, the community serves the person. And the community serves the growing Sioux boy or girl in 1,000 ways. You can go into any teepee as a child, and maybe you're having a tough time with your parents. Well, you might go to your grandparents, or you could just go to anybody and just camp with them for 4 days, and they would feed you and love you and make a great fuss of you. They did not discipline their children in the normal way of, punishments. There was no reward in punishment. But there was a lot of teaching from nature and from certain customs, certain protocols.
Anyway, here we are.
So no, I was just saying to you that I was very friendly with Wilmer Mesteth, who was the chief spiritual leader of the Lakota Sioux, which is one of 7 campfires. And he once said to me, because he knew I was an outsider and a kind of maverick, and he said, if you want to be part of this society, you have to learn the protocols. That word is stuck in my mind. So they haven't got anything called religion. They don't even have a word for religion. What they do have is a very strong sense of the sacred in everything, not just in nature, yes, in certain places in nature particularly, but also in their protocols, the way you treat people, the way you do things, the way you pray. So it is a way with a capital W, and that implies doing. It's the things you do day in and day out. That's their spirituality. As well as some of the more famous things like the Vision Quest or shamanic trance or things of that nature. So the whole society tacitly agrees on the protocols, but the protocols allow for people to defy them in certain circumstances, walk away. And they even have a kind of archetypal figure of the sacred clown called a heyoka, or the reversal man or the reversal woman who does everything in reverse. In a way, Crazy Horse was a reversal person because he was so humble. He did not act like a normal warrior. He refused to wear feathers in his headdress. I think maybe he had one, but he could have had one of these really big headdresses. You earn a feather. You have no right to put a feather on your head unless you've earned it by a deed in battle or in everyday life. And he wouldn't do that. So in a way, he was a heyoka. And the heyoka would do things like going to a religious ceremony, or I shouldn't call it that, going to a sacred ceremony, and, you know, farting loudly and disrupting it, and kind of like a holy fool in Christianity, but I think much more active, and also much more, I mean, Crazy Horse wouldn't have done things like that, but there's a lot of things he didn't do, which were protocols. And he kind of, he was quite solitary, and he would go away for long periods of time to be on his own. And so a Heyoka is someone really who is the reverse of the protocol. So you have the protocols, but you also have the ability to reverse the protocols. And that is what cleanses the protocols. That's where the danger of religion with a capital R, comes from. That if you don't cleanse the waters of cleansing, then the waters of cleansing become polluted. This is what Buddha was doing with Hinduism, I believe. He was cleaning, he was washing clean the waters of washing clean. If you see what I mean?
Yes, yes.
So anyway, does that give a little sense of it? I could also speak about it as yin yang, and I think I would like to for just a moment.
Yes, please do.
Because this is also in Hasidic Judaism. Yes. Judaism has the exact same concept of community and person as absolutes that the Red Indians have. I cannot see much. It's practiced a bit differently in different circumstances, because the Red Indians are nomads and hunter-gatherers, and the Jews are often certainly not that. They're in cities or they're in the countryside, but they're in a different context. So, but I start with the yin yang. Yin yang can be in a state of undifferentiation, and they call that the uncarved block. And this is kind of the void where all possibilities coexist, but nothing has emerged. That's rather similar to the image in Genesis of this deep and the spirit hovering over it. And then the yin and yang emerge, and there's a possibility for the yin and yang to become divided. And so it becomes right against left, man against woman, you know what I mean? Light against dark, all this kind of thing. And then there can come a more spiritual resolution where yin and yang come back into vital relationship. And it's only in this vital relationship that yin is really yin and that yang is really yang. This is the paradox. If you overstress the community, you lose the community. If you overstress the person, you lose the person. That is a tremendous insight. The individual who's ego-driven and out only for success and sees the world in terms of ego power, and therefore, obviously, the few against the many. That's not freedom. That's kind of enchainment, and that's not personalness, you know. So in this third condition where the yin and yang meet, that is the condition that society should strive to emulate. And it's all for one and one for all.
Yeah. And in a good
person serving the community taking care of the person. And those are bonds of love, affection. Those are bonds of friendship because they're acted out in reality. They are not ideas in the head. They're not just ideas in abstract space. They're practiced from the time you meet your mother. The mother is crucial for all of this.
I think
mother says to the baby, sorry, but I've got a bit of an sorry, I'll shut up. Mother says to the baby, not just welcome, but you have a place in this world. Very important.
Yeah, that you're wanted, you're needed, you have a place in this world, and, yep. and that respect of the person, isn't it? And when you see good community, then you not only feel that wonder of the community, but you see people more fully themselves.
Absolutely.
That's the gift, isn't it?
That is what this third way is about, and the third state of the opposites. It even applies to how to read scripture. Can I tell you that?
Please do.
This is from Hasidic Judaism. You probably know that I've studied a lot of Judaism and even a bit of Hebrew over the last 10 years in order to write the Passion books. and because they're essentially Jewish, not Greek in origin. And so the Hasids say, they're well aware that there are a lot of odd and even ugly statements in the Jewish Bible. And something that happens fairly often is that you get a tougher statement and then you get a more benign statement. And if you just read the two statements, they seem to cancel each other out. You know, universal redemption, heaven and hell, and with a lot of people ending up in hell. And so the way the Hasids read the Bible is not to just, they don't change the Bible. This is a funny paradox in itself. They leave the stuff that troubles them. They leave it because it's in the Bible, but they find a third quote or a third idea or a third statement that will reconcile the two. So even they have that idea as the way to read the Bible. You can't really read the Jewish Bible without being guided by Jews. You know, the attempt by fundamentalists to quote the Jewish Bible is ridiculous. They do not know what they're talking about.
So if there was something, but you were
anyway.
When we were talking the other day about Judaism, you were saying about the obligation of the rich to care for the poor. That's
absolutely
intrinsic to the faith.
It's in the Jewish law. Now it's in the 600 plus extra little laws.
Oh, okay.
That supposedly were invented by Moses. They surely were not invented by Moses. They came later, but never mind their origin. They are the equivalent of what Wilmer called protocols. In other words, everything in your life, everything, even the way you brush your teeth, and I could get more scatological, everything can be made sacred. Making sacred is the Red Indian phrase, but this is what the law really is, or even the laws with a small l and a plural s. They're these protocols of sacredness. And I don't like all of them. I think they're I think to have 600 of them is a little excessive. You could survive with maybe 60. That would be surely enough. But never mind. They cover everything, and they cover business, and they cover trade. As Gorbachev said, there's always been trade. I mean, you can trace trade back thousands of years. I mean, people have always had to make a living. So, you know. So in Judaism, it is a part of the law that the rich have to look after the society. In other words, the law says to them, the individual cannot exercise license and be selfish. Yes, they can earn money. Yes, they can even become rich. But beyond a certain point, they have to use that money to help to build up the society. So if you wanted to tax rich people, it occurred to me, instead of abstractly just saying, you know, after your 10th million, you've got to give another million away to something. You could say to them, you have an option to build a school. You know, for a billionaire, that's not going to be difficult. You have an option of, I don't know, financing the rebuilding of the sewerage system, anything you like that is socially useful and that brings people together and holds them together. So in Judaism, there's no choice. It is not a choice. If you want to remain a Jew in the spiritual sense, then you as a rich person, you have to look after the community, and therefore you would spend a large part of the excess, if you like. I mean, where should the cutoff be? 1 million is not a lot of money today, but 10 million sounds like quite a lot of money. And yet we have billionaires. So what are they going to do with those billions?
And so that is one of my questions on this list of podcasts, is like, if you had billions now, what would you spend it on? Where do you think it most needs to go?
Oh, there's so many places.
I know. That's
something you told me about green housing, and I thought that was a really good idea that you came up with. As for me,
So I think one of the things that I'm asking is, so like when I was talking to my brother, he was saying biodiversity because that's what he understands. It
Yes.
doesn't have to be what you understand, because obviously I don't really understand about housing, but eco-housing would be one of my things. But something that you're passionate about, or that, like you were saying, someone might, do a sewage system because they understand water or they understand drains, or someone might build a school because they're interested in that. So what, from your own sort of heart interest, would you put money into? Would you,
Well,
at this time?
I've always been somewhere between poor and survival, so I've never had money.
Go for fantasy, though. I love the fantasy.
No, I know. I think for me, obviously, it would be something to do with the earth and loving the earth and saving the earth. And for me, because shamanism is in the brew along with Judaism and Christianity, it would be animals. I would do something about animals, even if I had to, take a gun and shoot the poachers who are trying to kill off the elephant. There is a place for that. This is the warrior in me. And if I really wanted to go out with a flourish, because it would certainly get me killed, I would do something about the wolf hatred by ranchers in America.
Yeah.
It's completely irrational.
So that
but then so much of America is. Pardon?
So the defending of the animals in
yeah, defending of animals, I think. But there's so many things. I mean, cool.
Sorry.
I think one of the things that we need is what the Sioux Indians call intelligence. Now, let me see if I can remember. I cannot remember the word. I can give it to you later when I've looked it up. But it means this: thinking with the people, for the people.
Yes,
now that we need, but we need to include the earth.
Yes. Well,
thinking with the earth, for the earth. So there are so many levels on which a really big pile of money in the right hands could do good.
Yes. And I think thinking for the earth, that's a really brilliant one, because that, when I came across donut economics, that made so much sense to me, because it's like, it's the people, the needs of the people in community and personally, and then it's the needs of the earth. And we need to look around and take care. We are part of this ecosystem. It's a community which involves creation. It's not just a community of persons, it's where we live, isn't it? It's like,
I mean, what you're saying is both shamanic and Jewish.
Yeah.
Is the world, all of the world is a community.
Yes.
And nature is definitely, I mean, this is the whole thing about dynamic balance, and the balance that predators and prey create, and all this kind of thing. It's a kind of community.
Yes. And oh, it's fascinating, isn't it?
And we're part of it. And of course, the earth is sacred for a Red Indian. The earth is sacred. And nature can teach you a lot of things which may be different from your idea of morality. Yes.
And I think that, yes. Well, I'm a Celt, so I sense that.
Pay attention.
Yes, pay attention.
Look at the lessons that are around you. That's what Red Indian elders say to the children.
Is it?
Pay attention.
My brother talked about that. He said about just being uncluttered enough to look and to see, because we carry a lot of clutter, don't we?
We carry immense rubbish in our heads and unconscious.
Yes, and just to actually to see and to listen, and in that sense, in that way, in our communities as well, to actually see who is in our community, who is our neighbour, where are we, and we don't. And I think the pandemic did help people to see that a little bit. That was part of what happened. So we've done quite a long stint, Jamie. I was just
I don't know what I've lost.
We've done nearly an hour.
Okay,
but I'm just wondering. So I always sort of say, like, another question. Is there what else, or is there something else you want to add into the mix? It's so huge, isn't it? It's vast. There
is one other thing I want to enter into the mix, if you don't mind.
Please.
The third way starts with shamanic societies. I don't know what you want to call them, First Nations societies. Indigenous is now sort of the favored word. Indigenous societies. And these societies are traditional.
Mm.
And you get this same reality in Judaism, and you get it in certain parts of Christianity, like the Orthodox East.
Mm.
Many Orthodox churches are in countries and are traditionalist in a rather similar way. Not entirely, obviously, because the differences are also to be honored and to be celebrated.
Mm.
But what I want to say is that traditionalism is not the same as conservatism.
Yeah, thank you.
And there is, in fact, a vast gap between the traditional and the conservative. And people who are starting to get interested in the traditional make the mistake of confusing it with right-wing conservatism. Traditionalism is not liberalism, which it would regard as sloppy. But traditionalism is not conservatism, which it would regard as harsh. And so traditionalism is not liberal progress, and it's not conservative holding on. The conservative holding on to the past implies that that past has already been lost. Mm-hmm. And because traditionalism is itself dynamic and has a radical side, a moving side, as well as a stationary, certain basics we keep to because they're life-giving. But at the same time, we're also in a caravan crossing vast spaces of time, and that matters. And so, in a funny way, traditionalism includes radicalism. I'm a radical as well as a traditionalist. But that is not what you get in conservatism, holding on to the past. That says the past is lost, and that says the past is going to be distorted by picking out only the most static things, and even there, misunderstanding their spirit. Traditional people are generally quite laid back, surprisingly. They're not zealots, they're not fanatics, they're quite easygoing and quite open to multiple ideas, and they're interested in all kinds of variety. So in the very attempt to preserve the past, conservatism has lost and distorted the past. And, you know, it's a shame that people who are interested in traditional society, like Jung and like this current Canadian professor, have confused traditional with conservative. And so their instincts are more on the right wing. Their instincts should not be on the right or the left, as polarized and divorced as we know them. It should be one for all and all for one. That's traditional. So that's the last thing I wanted to end on. Liberalism is soft shit. Conservatism is hard shit, but they're both shit.
I think, you know.
Can I say that? I've said it.
Oh, well, you said it, and you're going to shoot the guys who do the wolves as well. So we're just going to have to put a flavor on it all.
Yeah. When I get to be 85 and I've finished all my work,
you're going out to shoot the wolves.
If I'm still fit enough, they will not sleep well at night. Those guys.
Yeah. I see how everyone gets. Anyway, one of the things I wanted to say is, I think having been very blessed to have worked with people and met people who are in living traditions. I count my dance teacher as one of them, and I count being Orthodox as one of them. It is very, the truth of it is fluid and radical, and because you know that it's held you like a good family, it's held you, but boy, you springing off from it. Are you going into different directions because you feel secure?
And it is changing in some ways too.
And it changes with every person. Every person who comes into it brings that spirit, changes it. But also it is that thing, isn't it? There's a heart to it, and there's a fluidity. I haven't quite got the right words, but I think that's a really important point, that people, and I always get worried because people go and look at me and they go like, you're conservative. And I'm going, no, I'm not conservative. But I think the traditional in that dynamic, it's a dynamism in there, isn't it?
That's it.
Yeah.
The dynamism is what holds the opposites
Yeah.
in creative tension.
Yeah.
And that's love. But, you know, in this life, as a Jewish saint once said, love is not enough.
No.
We need anger and we need grief, but we need to have the anger and the grief together.
And the anger and the grief directed, isn't it? It's like my mother always used to say, you know, be angry and sin not. You know, don't let the sun go down on your wrath. You know, you can be angry because it gives you a dynamic energy, and, you know, love and
no, but we're talking about an existential situation, and we're also talking about the old meaning of anger, which is anger for truth.
Yeah.
And anger for truth is probably the most hopeful thing, because it implies that the object of anger can change. And that something, and there's
something
can be done.
Yes, there's a doing in there, isn't there?
Yeah, there's a distinct doing. That's right.
That was a good one. I like that end one. Thank you. Anything else?
Don't thank me. That's wrong.
Oh, no, thank you. Okay, well, whatever. I'm afraid I come from a culture where in my tradition there's a lot of thanks, because people
no, gratitude is good, but you don't have to say thank you. That's the only point.
Okay. All right.
No obligation.
No obligation. A lot of gratitude. Really good of you to give us the time.
No, it was it's good to have a conversation. It's nice. It's always different if it's a dialogue rather than one person writing something down on their own. I mean, that can be inspired, but there's something about dialogue that is a bit special. I think so. I've really enjoyed it with the spoken word. Yes. The oral tradition, for example. The oral tradition is all that exists in shamanism, but in Judaism, people don't know this. There's an oral tradition. It's probably more important than the written down tradition. And there is in Orthodoxy as well. Yes, and I remember things when people say things to you. I remember it far more than if I read it. I mean, reading is sometimes really good, but if I hear it, it stays. Yeah, stays more. So it's that sort of actuality. Yeah. Spoken word. Yeah, that's the logos. Brilliant.